Nobody wants to look at your ugly ranch garbage. Get rid of it or I will.
That's what the HOA president told me the first time she showed up at my gate with a clipboard and an attitude wider than her white Escalade. The fence she was talking about? My grandfather poured the concrete for those posts in 1978. My wife, who died 3 years ago, spent her last good afternoon tracing the family brand mark back into the wood with a tiny brush, humming a song I'll never hear again. This woman wanted me to tear it down because it didn't match her subdivision's color scheme. When I refused, she painted over it herself, tried to have it demolished, and charged 312 families nearly $400,000 to maintain a fence she didn't own. She picked the wrong rancher. I spent 22 years as a power lineman, and I was about to teach her what happens when you touch something that carries a current. Would you have walked away or started wiring? My name's Garrett Colton, and my family has owned 40 acres of ranch land outside Dripping Springs, Texas, since 1971. My grandfather bought it when the hill country was nothing but cedar, limestone, and cattle trails. He put up the fence himself, 6-foot pipe posts sunk in concrete, 4 runs of heavy-gauge cable wire strung tight enough to hum in the wind. He burned the Colton brand mark into the corner post with a branding iron the same year. That fence wasn't decoration. It was a boundary, a statement, and a family heirloom built with hands that never asked permission from anyone. I grew up running that fence line every morning. Learned to weld pipe before I learned to drive. After high school, I joined Pedernales Electric Cooperative as a lineman and spent 22 years climbing poles, running cable, and fixing things that carried enough voltage to turn a man into a memory. I married Claire in 2004. She loved that ranch the way some people love churches, quietly, deeply, like the land itself had a soul she could hear. We planned to run it together full-time after I retired. She didn't make it. Pancreatic cancer took her 3 years ago, fast and mean. And the only thing she asked me at the end was to keep the ranch alive and raise our daughter Lily right. Lily was 16 now. She could rope a calf, shoe a horse, and calculate feed costs on a napkin faster than most accountants could on a spreadsheet. We ran 28 head of crossbred cattle on those 40 acres, and on any given morning, the soundtrack was boot leather on Caliche, the low complaint of a bull who hadn't had his grain yet, and the creak of a gate my grandfather hung in 1978. Then, Creekstone Meadows happened. 8 years ago, a developer bought the parcel east of our property and dropped 312 houses on it, like someone shook a box of Monopoly pieces across the prairie. Stucco walls, identical mailboxes, lawns so green they looked irradiated, and an HOA with bylaws thicker than the Bible, and about half as forgiving. Tammy Suttonfield appointed herself president in year 1 and never let go. She was a heavy-set blonde in her late 40s who drove a pearl-white Escalade and wore linen blazers over yoga pants, like she was heading to a board meeting at a spa. She carried a clipboard the way a general carries a sidearm, always visible, always ready, always pointed at someone who hadn't asked for her opinion. I once saw her measure a neighbor's mailbox height with a tape measure while the neighbor was still getting the mail out of it. Her first visit was 3 weeks after the subdivision opened. She drove right up to my ranch gate, stepped out in spotless white sneakers onto caliche dust, and handed me a letter titled, "Welcome to the Neighborhood, Community Standards Notification." 11 items, 11 visual concerns. Number 3 was excessive livestock odor. I had 28 cows on 40 acres. That's roughly 1 cow per acre and a half. The Pentagon has denser personnel per square foot. Number 7 was unapproved earth tones on auxiliary structures. She meant the color of my barn, the natural cedar, the wood itself. She wanted me to repaint God's color palette to match her subdivision's approved swatch. Creekstone sage green. I read all 11 items, folded the letter and said, "Ma'am, my land isn't in your subdivision." She smiled like I'd said something adorable. "We're all neighbors now, Mr. Colton." 2 weeks later, Trey Boland, the guy whose backyard shared the closest line with my east fence, draped a wet beach towel over my cable wire after his kid's pool party. I walked over, knocked politely, and asked him to take it down. He shrugged. Tammy said it's fine. She said the fence is basically shared property. It was not shared property. But that was just the first towel. Within 3 weeks, Trey Boland's single towel had spawned an epidemic. 8 families were now treating my ranch fence like a community clothesline. I drive the ATV out to check the east fence line and find bath towels, fitted sheets, yoga pants, and once, I swear I'm not making this up, a king-size comforter draped across 40 feet of cable wire like someone was decorating for a redneck wedding. The weight was killing the fence. Cable wire is built to resist lateral pressure from livestock, not to support soaking wet cotton sagging in the Texas heat. The moisture was eating through the galvanized coating. Rust spots bloomed along the east run like freckles on a sunburn. Every time the wind picked up, some article of clothing would slip off the wire and land in my pasture. I found a pair of men's boxer briefs tangled in mesquite brush 20 yards from the fence line. My daughter Lily picked them up with a stick, held them at arm's length like a biohazard sample, and said, "Dad, if this is what neighbors are, I want to live on an island." I wrote polite letters to all 8 households, handwritten, civil. 2 of them, the Andersons and the Harrisons, apologized and stopped. Good people. The other 6 didn't respond. Trey Boland told me through his screen door that he'd check with Tammy, which is what people say when they already know the answer and don't care about yours. Tammy's response arrived 2 days later in a crisp HOA envelope sealed with a gold sticker, a formal violation notice citing Community Aesthetic Standards Section 4.7 and fining me $250 per day for maintaining a fence not in compliance with visual harmony guidelines. Let me repeat that for anyone who thinks I'm exaggerating. She fined me for my fence on my land that her residents were using as a clothesline because it wasn't pretty enough for a subdivision it didn't belong to. Now here's what Tammy didn't count on. I pulled up the Creekstone Meadows CC and Rs that evening. The full document, not the glossy summary pamphlet she hands out at open houses. Section 4.7 applies exclusively to properties within the platted subdivision boundary as recorded with the Hays County Clerk. My ranch was not within that boundary. Never annexed, never recorded, never included. It existed decades before her subdivision was even a line on a developer's cocktail napkin. Tammy's fine had the same legal authority as a parking ticket written by a crossing guard in a different school district. I drafted a certified letter, cited the CC and Rs by paragraph, cited the Hays County plat records by filing number, cited the Texas Property Code section that defines HOA jurisdiction, sent it registered mail with a closing line that read, "I trust this resolves the matter." Tammy's response was a second fine, same amount, same section, same language. She didn't change a single word. She just redated it and mailed it back like my legal citations were a suggestion she'd decided to ignore. The woman treated property law the way a toddler treats the word no, as an opening offer. Around the same time, kids from the subdivision started climbing my fence like it was a jungle gym. 3 pipe posts got bent. Someone spray-painted "Move Your Cows" on the south section in neon green, artistry that would have embarrassed a bathroom stall. One kid fell off the top rail and scraped his knee, and his mother, Christy Lumley, marched over to inform me that my fence was a hazard to children and that I should install rubber padding on the top rail. I fixed the posts myself, welded the bent ones straight, sanded off the graffiti, bought new paint, $400 in materials, and a full Saturday of work, all because people who didn't own the fence, live on the land, or pay for the upkeep had decided it belonged to them. I drove to the HOA office the following Monday and asked Darla Keenan, the board secretary, about reimbursement for the damage. She blinked at me from behind a desk covered in scented candles and motivational signs about community spirit. "Mrs. Suttonfield says your property isn't covered by our liability insurance," she said, reading from a sticky note, "because technically it's not in the subdivision." I stared at her for a long moment. So my fence isn't in the subdivision when it comes to paying for damage, but it is in the subdivision when it comes to collecting fines. Darla opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her candle like it might offer guidance. "That's what I thought," I said. 2 weeks after my visit to the HOA office, Tammy called an emergency board session. I know this because Darla Keenan, who was beginning to develop a nervous eye twitch every time Tammy's name came up in conversation, quietly emailed me the minutes afterward. The board had passed something called the Shared Perimeter Use Policy, and it was a masterpiece of suburban fiction. The policy declared that any boundary structure within 20 feet of the subdivision lot line may be designated as a shared-use community amenity. In plain English, Tammy had just voted my private fence into public service, in a meeting I wasn't invited to, on property she had no authority over, using a policy she invented in the time it takes most people to order lunch. The woman governed like a dictator with a laminator. I read the official copy at my kitchen table, while Lily ate cereal and looked over my shoulder. Dad, can they actually do that? Honey, I could write a policy declaring the moon belongs to the Colton family. Doesn't mean NASA's going to return my calls. But Tammy wasn't done writing fiction. A week later, I was driving the ATV down the east fence line just before sundown when something stopped me cold. The light was hitting the fence wrong. The color was off. I climbed down, walked over, and ran my hand along the pipe. Fresh paint. Creekstone sage green. 200 feet of my fence, painted without my knowledge, without my consent, without so much as a sticky note on my gate. Tammy had sent a crew to repaint my private property in the official HOA color, as if stamping her brand on it made it hers. The paint was still tacky. It stuck to my palm like a bad handshake. And that's when I saw what they'd covered. The Colton brand mark. My grandfather carved it into the corner post in 1978 with a chisel and a steady hand, a simple C inside a circle. The same mark we burned into every fence post, every gate, every piece of equipment on this ranch for over 50 years. Claire had traced over it with wood stain 2 months before she died, sitting in the shade with a tiny brush, humming something I can never quite remember. She said the brand looked tired and deserved a touch-up. They painted over it, like it was graffiti on a highway overpass. I stood there with my hand on that post for a long time. The sage green paint was tacky under my fingertips, and I could feel the groove of the brand underneath. Buried, but not erased. The sun was dropping behind the cedar ridge, and the air smelled like warm latex mixed with something older. Creosote and iron and memory. I could feel my pulse in my jaw. I called Deputy Wade Hollister at the Hays County Sheriff's Office that evening. He drove out the next morning, took photographs, and wrote up a report documenting unauthorized alteration of private property. He was sympathetic and thorough, but honest. Garrett, I can file this, and I will, but it's paint. Getting the DA to prosecute criminal mischief over a paint job is going to be a steep climb. I understand, I said. File it anyway. Here's what most people don't know about Texas Penal Code Section 28.03. Criminal mischief covers any intentional damage, destruction, or unauthorized alteration of another person's property. The charge level depends on the dollar amount of the damage. 200 feet of specialty paint removal, surface restoration, and rebranding on a ranch fence that's been in continuous use since 1978. That's not a weekend project with a wire brush. That's professional restoration work. And every dollar of that estimate was going into my file. I started documenting everything. Every photograph, every letter, every fine, every voicemail Tammy left on my phone, each one dripping with the condescending warmth of a woman who believes a clipboard makes her a deputy governor. I bought a fireproof lockbox and stored hard copies alongside digital backups. Lily watched me organizing the files one evening. "What are you building?" she asked. "A case." She nodded once, the way her mother used to, and went back to her homework. Tammy's next move arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, hand-delivered by a man in a polo shirt embroidered with the Creekstone Meadows logo. An ultimatum, printed on letterhead so thick you could shingle a roof with it. I had 30 days to voluntarily remove or relocate the perimeter fence structure, or the HOA would authorize its contractor to dismantle the structure for community safety purposes. The letter was signed by all 5 board members, though I later learned Tammy had forged 3 of those signatures herself. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the lockbox next to 17 other documents that proved Tammy Suttonfield believed she governed territory that existed only inside her own head. Then I called a surveyor. His name was Cal Bridger, a licensed professional land surveyor out of San Marcos who'd been mapping hill country property lines for 31 years. He arrived on a Wednesday morning with a GPS unit, a tripod, and the quiet confidence of a man who deals in facts that don't care about feelings. By noon, he'd driven 47 survey pins into the hard Texas earth and drawn a boundary line so clean you could hang a picture from it. The results were exactly what I expected and everything Tammy didn't want to hear. My fence sat 100% on Colton ranch land. Every post, every cable run, every inch. The nearest subdivision lot line was 14 feet east of my fence. That meant the strip of ground between my fence and the subdivision, the strip where neighbors walked their dogs, kids rode bikes, and Christy Lumley's son had scraped his knee, was also my property. They'd been trespassing on my land every single day, and Tammy had been encouraging it like a tour guide for an amusement park she didn't own. But Cal found something else, something nobody was expecting. 3 houses on the eastern edge of Creekstone Meadows, the Bolins, the Lumleys, and a family named Durbin, had each built permanent structures that extended past the subdivision boundary onto my ranch land. Trey Boland's concrete patio crossed over by 7 feet. Christy Lumley's wooden deck extended 4 feet past the line. The Durbins had poured an entire hot tub pad 6 feet onto my property. These weren't garden gnomes. These were permanent, permitted improvements sitting on someone else's dirt. Did the HOA know? I asked Cal. He pulled up county permit records. The permits list correct lot dimensions, but the actual construction exceeds them in all 3 cases. Someone either didn't check or didn't want to. I knew which one. Tammy had approved every one of those projects through her architectural review committee. She let it happen because those families voted for her every year. Their loyalty bought them 7 feet of my land, and Tammy never mentioned it because mentioning it would mean admitting the line existed. I took the survey report, 43 pages, stamped and certified, to the next HOA meeting. Maybe 40 residents in folding chairs under fluorescent lights that buzzed like a dentist's drill. Tammy stood at the front in a navy blazer, clipboard against her hip like a shield. I waited until the open comment period, stood up, and handed her the report. "This is a certified survey of my property line," I said. "Your fence policy, your fines, and your ultimatum all reference a structure that sits entirely on private ranch land outside your jurisdiction. I'd like the board to acknowledge that in tonight's minutes." Tammy flipped through 3 pages, stopped, and looked up. Her face had gone the particular shade of pink that precedes either an apology or an attack. With Tammy, it was never an apology. "Surveys can be wrong, Mr. Colton. This is a community decision, not a property line technicality. It's not a community decision when it's not community property." The room went quiet enough to hear the fluorescent lights change pitch. Then Earl Jessup stood up. Earl was 81 years old, had been the Hayes County clerk for 26 years before retiring, and lived in one of the original houses near the subdivision entrance. He spoke slowly, with the measured cadence of a man who has never needed to repeat himself. "She's right about one thing," Earl said. "Surveys can be contested, but not when the county filed the original in 1971 and I processed the paperwork myself." Tammy stared at him. The room stared at her. She closed the report, set it on the podium, and said, "We'll take this under advisement." She never advised anyone about anything. She just kept getting angrier. And anger makes people sloppy. Earl Jessup called me the next morning and asked me to come by his place. He lived in a small limestone cottage near the subdivision entrance, one of the original houses from before Creekstone Meadows existed, surrounded by live oaks so old they'd probably watched the Comanche ride through. Earl made coffee in a percolator that looked like it had survived the Korean War and set 2 mugs on a table buried under paper. "Garrett, I've been watching that woman operate for 7 years," he said, "and there's something you need to see." He pushed a stack of HOA financial statements across the table. Annual reports, budget summaries, line item expenditures. Earl had been requesting copies every year under the Texas Property Code, which gives any homeowner the right to inspect HOA financial records. Most people never bother. Earl wasn't most people. "Look at page 4, he said. "Same line, every year." I looked. The line item read, "Perimeter Maintenance Assessment, $180 per lot annually. 312 lots. That came to $56,160 per year. Tammy had been collecting this assessment for all 7 years of her presidency. Total collected, approximately $393,000. What exactly is the perimeter maintenance for? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Earl smiled the way a man smiles when he's waited 7 years for someone to finally ask the right question. The assessment is supposed to fund maintenance, repair, and improvement of perimeter fencing and boundary structures. But here's the beautiful part, Garrett. The subdivision doesn't have perimeter fencing, never built any, never contracted any, never poured a single post hole. The only fence on the entire perimeter of Creekstone Meadows is yours. I set the mug down. The coffee suddenly tasted like evidence. She's been charging 312 families to maintain a fence she doesn't own. Oh, it gets better, Earl said, and flipped to the vendor payment records. Every single dollar of the perimeter maintenance assessment, all $393,000, had been paid to one company, Suttonfield Landscape and Grading, LLC. Owner and sole proprietor, Bryce Suttonfield, Tammy's husband. The same man whose pickup truck was parked in the HOA lot every board meeting night. The same man who did discount driveway work for half the subdivision to keep people happy and quiet. Nearly $400,000, collected to maintain a fence that belonged to me, funneled into her husband's company. Not $1 had touched my property. Not one repair. Not one coat of paint. Well, except the sage green coat I never asked for. That's embezzlement, I said. That's what I've been saying to my bathroom mirror for 3 years, Earl said. But nobody on that board has the spine to ask questions, and Bryce does landscaping at cost for anyone who might cause trouble. Loyalty bought with discount mulch and fear of fines. I sat there, staring at 7 years of records that told a story Tammy never wanted read. Outside, a mockingbird screamed from a cedar post, and the morning sun cut through the live oaks like a blade. $400,000. That was the real number. That was what all of this was really about. Not clotheslines, not aesthetics, not community harmony. Tammy needed my fence to exist so she could justify the assessment. She needed it to look like an HOA asset so nobody would wonder where the money went. And she absolutely, desperately, needed me to shut up, stay confused, and never hire a surveyor. She'd miscalculated on every single count. I didn't sleep much that week. Not from anger, from planning. The kind of focused, clear-headed planning that comes when you finally see the whole board and realize you've been playing chess while your opponent was playing checkers with half the pieces missing. Step 1 was the fence itself. I needed to stop the trespassing, the clotheslines, the climbing, and the property damage. And I needed to do it in a way that was completely, unassailably, beautifully legal. I knew exactly how. I'd spent 22 years as a power lineman for Pedernales Electric Cooperative. I'd run hot cable through lightning storms, rewired transformer banks while turkey vultures circled overhead, and once rebuilt a 3-phase junction box during Hurricane Harvey while standing in water up to my shins. I know electricity the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not from textbooks, but from touch, from muscle memory, from years of respect for something that kills when you get careless. An agricultural electric fence is one of the simplest and most elegant electrical systems on Earth. A solar-powered energizer sends a pulse, roughly 1 per second, through a wire at about 7,000 volts, but extremely low amperage. It's enough to make a 1,200-pound steer reconsider his life choices at a fence line. It's enough to make a grown adult yell a word they'd never say in church. But it won't injure, won't burn, and won't stop a heart. It's designed to startle, not harm. That's the entire engineering philosophy. Under the Texas Agriculture Code, any property classified for agricultural use has the legal right to install electric fencing for livestock management. My ranch had carried an agricultural tax exemption since 1971. I ran 28 head of cattle on that land. I had every legal right to electrify my fence, and no HOA, no county ordinance, and no Tammy Suttonfield on God's green Texas earth had the authority to tell me otherwise. I ordered a Gallagher S400 solar-powered energizer, top of the line, built for permanent pasture installations. I drove grounding rods 8 feet deep at 3 points along the fence line, spacing them exactly to manufacturer specifications. Ran a dedicated hot wire along the top cable and insulated it from the pipe posts with offset ceramic brackets. The system was clean, professional, and built to a standard that would have passed any ag inspection in the state. If my old supervisor at Pedernales had walked the line, he'd have nodded once and said, "Looks right, Colton." Warning signs went up every 50 feet along the east fence line. Bright yellow, bilingual, universal lightning bolt symbol. Texas law requires adequate warning for agricultural electric fencing. I gave them more than adequate. I gave them impossible to miss. While the fence got its upgrade, I worked the other front. Filed a formal records request under the Texas Property Code for every HOA financial document going back 7 years. Bank statements, vendor contracts, board minutes, assessment records, check images, everything. The law gives them 10 business days to produce. I started counting. I also called Connie Pratt at KVUE News in Austin. Connie was a veteran investigative reporter who'd built her career busting small-town corruption, shady contractors, embezzling school board members, HOA fraud rings. She was exactly the kind of person who made Tammy Suttonfield types lose sleep. I gave her the outline, the assessment, the vendor payments, the Suttonfield connection, the dollar amount, and she went quiet for 5 seconds. How much total? Close to 400,000. Can you document it? 7 years of financial statements, vendor payment records, a certified property survey, and a retired county clerk who'll testify he's been watching it happen. Give me 2 weeks to verify independently, she said. This is a story. Meanwhile, Earl Jessup had been doing his own quiet work. He'd knocked on doors, shared coffee on porches, and had the kind of unhurried conversations only an 81-year-old retired county clerk can have. The kind where people trust you because you've outlasted every fad and every HOA president. Earl found 15 homeowners fed up with Tammy, fined for paint colors, fined for trash can angles, fined for Christmas lights past January 15th. Each of them had a grievance, and Earl gave each of them a reason to show up at the annual meeting. I sat on my porch that evening, listening to the steady tick, tick, tick of the Energizer pulsing through the fence line. The cattle had already learned. They touched the hot wire once, snorted, backed off, and never went near it again. I figured the neighbors would have roughly the same learning curve. The first casualty of the electric fence was Trey Boland's favorite beach towel. It happened on a Saturday morning. I was in the barn replacing a water pump gasket when I heard a sound I can only describe as a cross between a yelp and a word that would get a man banned from every church potluck in Hayes County. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the fence line. Trey was standing 5 feet back, shaking his right hand, staring at the wire like it had personally insulted his mother. His beach towel, a faded thing with a marlin on it that had clearly seen better decades, was draped over the hot wire, and the Energizer was pulsing through it with the patience of a metronome. "Your fence shocked me," he shouted. "It's an electric fence," I said. "There are signs." He looked at the nearest sign, bright yellow, lightning bolt. Warning, electric fence, in English and Spanish, 20 inches from where he'd been standing. You can't just electrify a fence in a neighborhood. It's not in a neighborhood, Trey. It's on a working cattle ranch. Those signs have been up for 2 weeks. And that's my fence. Please take your towel home. He grabbed the towel with a stick, shot me a look that could curdle milk at 40 paces, and marched back to his yard. By noon, Tammy's white Escalade was parked at the curb, and she was on her phone, pacing the sidewalk like a general who'd just lost a battalion and was calling for reinforcements. 3 days later, Phil Osterfeld from Hayes County Code Enforcement pulled up in a gray county truck and walked the entire east fence line with a clipboard and a handheld voltage meter. I met him by the corner post and offered him water. He declined politely. "Got a complaint about an electrified fence," he said, "filed by the HOA president. I need to verify compliance." "Take your time," I said. Phil spent 45 minutes checking every component. He measured the distance between warning signs, tested the voltage output, checked the Energizer specs against manufacturer safety ratings, examined the grounding system and the ceramic insulators at every post junction. He walked the property line with his GPS unit and pulled up my AG exemption on his county tablet. Then he closed his clipboard, tucked his pen into his shirt pocket, and looked at me with the expression of a man who'd driven 20 miles to inspect something that didn't need inspecting. Agricultural property. Agricultural fence. Properly signed. Fully compliant. He paused. I have no jurisdiction here, Mr. Colton. You're well within your rights. I appreciate you being thorough, I said. I'll file my report. If anyone calls again, I'll reference it and save us both the trip. He nodded, climbed back into his truck, and drove off trailing a plume of caliche dust that hung in the air like a period at the end of a sentence. Tammy did not take Phil's report well. That evening, she sent an email blast to all 312 households. Subject line, in all caps. Urgent safety alert. Dangerous electrified fence threatens our children. 4 paragraphs of weaponized panic written in Comic Sans, with 3 exclamation marks after every sentence. She called me a dangerous rural holdout and a hillbilly who values cattle over children. She demanded signatures on a petition and proposed a special assessment of $75 per household to hire a litigation team. I read it on my porch in the dark, listening to the Energizer tick and heat lightning grumble over the ridge. The air smelled like warm cedar and the faint edge of ozone. I thought about Claire, who would have laughed so hard she'd have choked on her iced tea. Hillbilly, she'd have said. The man who rebuilt the power grid during Harvey is a hillbilly. 47 people signed. Tammy submitted it to the Hayes County Commissioner's Court. It came back with 1 paragraph. The property is classified as agricultural land with a valid exemption. The fence meets all applicable state requirements. The county has no authority to intervene on private agricultural property based on a residential HOA petition. Meanwhile, Christy Lumley posted on Nextdoor that the electric fence almost killed my son Tyler. According to her post, Tyler had grabbed the wire and been thrown to the ground. I checked the trail camera footage. Tyler Lumley walked up to the fence, read the warning sign, touched the plastic sign, which carries no current, and walked away eating a popsicle. He never touched the hot wire. He was never shocked. He was never on the ground. The footage was time-stamped, high definition, and clear as a confession. I saved it. I saved everything. Because by now, I wasn't just protecting a fence. I was building something much bigger. Tammy's next move told me she was getting desperate, because desperate people hire lawyers, and smart people know when to fire them. She retained an attorney named Keith Volner from a firm in Austin that specialized in HOA disputes. Volner sent me a cease and desist letter demanding I remove the electric fence within 10 business days, claiming it constituted a public nuisance and reckless endangerment of neighboring residents. The letter was 4 pages long, cited 7 statutes, and used the word forthwith 3 times, which in my experience is how lawyers say, I'm billing by the hour and I want you to know it. Here's what Tammy didn't know about Keith Volner. He was a competent attorney, and competent attorneys do their homework before they stake their reputation on a case. Within a week, Volner called Tammy and withdrew. Darla told me about it over coffee at Earl's kitchen table. Volner had reviewed my response, the survey, the ag exemption, the code enforcement clearance, the criminal mischief report, the trespass report, and the crown jewel, $393,000 in assessments paid to her husband's company for a fence she didn't own. Volner took one look at the embezzlement exposure and told Tammy he couldn't represent her. What he actually said, according to Darla, was, Mrs. Suttonfield, you don't need a fence lawyer. You need a criminal defense attorney. Tammy hung up on him, which, if you think about it, was the most honest legal advice she'd received in 7 years, and she rejected it the way she rejected everything, by pretending it didn't exist. Then came Thursday night. Just past midnight, I was pulled from sleep by a sound that didn't belong to the ranch. Not coyotes, not the cattle shifting in the pen, something mechanical, a low diesel rumble, and the scrape of metal teeth biting into earth. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked the fence line in the dark. At the southeast corner, where the fence ran closest to the subdivision access road, I found a trench, 2 feet deep, 6 feet long, cut clean through the soil directly over my grounding rods. The grounding system for the electric fence, the component that makes the whole circuit work, had been severed like someone cutting a phone line in a movie. Next to the trench, tire tracks from a compact excavator led out to the county road and disappeared. I checked the trail camera. The footage was beautiful. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. Doug Parnell, a contractor who did regular work for Bryce Suttonfield, operating a Kubota mini excavator with the headlights off, digging in the dark like a man who knew he was doing something he shouldn't. And there, parked on the county road 50 feet away with his window rolled down, sat Bryce Suttonfield himself in his black Silverado, watching the whole operation. The license plate was clear as a newspaper headline. I called Deputy Hollister at 7 the next morning. He watched the footage twice, examined the trench, and wrote up 2 reports: criminal trespass and criminal mischief. By noon, both Doug Parnell and Bryce Suttonfield had been contacted by the sheriff's office. Doug, who had no appetite for a felony charge over someone else's grudge, cooperated immediately. Bryce hired a lawyer and stopped answering his phone. Tammy went into total meltdown. Called board members at 2 in the morning, cycling between threats and tears. 2 refused to attend her emergency session. The third, a retired dentist named George Wendt, said he'd come, but only if the agenda included a full review of the perimeter maintenance assessment, because he'd been wondering where that money goes for 6 years. Tammy stopped calling. Darla, meanwhile, finally opened the HOA's QuickBooks account. What she found confirmed everything, plus bonuses, inflated invoices, duplicate payments, and a $14,000 emergency landscaping charge dated 2 days after Tammy's vacation to Cabo. Emergency landscaping. In January. In Texas. Darla called me that evening. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were steady as a surveyor's line. "Garrett, I have the bank records, all of them, every transaction. What do you want me to do?" "Save them," I said. "Copy them, and come to the annual meeting." I fixed the grounding system the next morning. Took me 90 minutes. When you've spent 2 decades working with electrical systems that can kill you, repairing a trench dug by an amateur in a rented excavator is roughly as challenging as changing a flat tire. The Energizer hummed back to life. The fence pulsed its steady rhythm, and the warning signs caught the morning sun like little yellow promises. The Creekstone Meadows annual homeowners meeting was held on the first Saturday of October in the community center, a building that smelled like old carpet, lemon floor cleaner, and the quiet resentment of 300 families who'd been paying for services they never received. The room was packed. Over 200 residents filled every folding chair and lined the back wall 3 deep. Earl Jessup sat in the front row, wearing a bolo tie, which for Earl meant he considered this a formal occasion worthy of full ceremony. Darla Keenan sat 2 rows behind him, with a manila folder on her lap and the rigid posture of a woman who had recently found religion inside a QuickBooks file. Connie Pratt from KVUE was stationed in the back corner with her cameraman, press badge visible, pretending to check her phone while the red recording light blinked steadily. Tammy opened the meeting like nothing was wrong. Cream blazer, gold buttons, reading glasses. 20 minutes about community safety and the ongoing fence situation. Stock photos of happy families. She proposed authorizing $40,000 to sue me. Used the word community 14 times. Safety 11 times. Accountability once, which I thought was bold. She did not use embezzlement. When she asked for questions, Earl raised his hand. "I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Garrett Colton. He has relevant information regarding the perimeter maintenance budget." Tammy's jaw tightened. But the bylaws guaranteed a comment period. She'd written those bylaws herself, never imagined they'd be used against her. I stood up, walked to the front of the room carrying my laptop and a folder of printed documents. Connected the laptop to the same projector Tammy had used for her stock photos of happy families, and opened my first slide. "My name is Garrett Colton. I own the ranch property adjacent to this subdivision. I'm not a member of this HOA, and I'm not here to talk about my fence. I'm here to talk about yours." First slide. A photograph of my fence, the Colton Ranch fence, with survey pins marking it entirely on my property, 14 feet from the nearest subdivision lot line. Second slide. The Hays County plat map. My property boundary in red, the subdivision boundary in blue, 14 feet of daylight between them. Third slide. The HOA annual budget. Line item highlighted. Perimeter maintenance assessment, $180 per lot per year. $56,160 collected annually. 7 years running. 312 families, I said. $180 each. Every year. For 7 years. You've collectively paid approximately $393,000 to maintain a perimeter fence. I let the numbers sit. The room was silent in the way that rooms get silent when people are doing math and not liking the answer. The subdivision does not own a perimeter fence. It has never built one. It has never contracted the construction of one. The only fence on your perimeter is mine. My family built it in 1978. I maintain it with my own hands and my own money, and not $1 of that assessment has ever been spent on it. Fourth slide. Vendor payment records. 7 years of checks, all payable to Suttonfield Landscape and Grading, LLC. Owner, Bryce Suttonfield. I didn't need to explain the connection. Every person in that room knew whose last name was on the podium. The murmur started low and built like a pressure wave. Chairs creaked. Someone in the middle rows said, "You have got to be kidding me." Someone else used language that was more direct. Fifth slide, trail camera footage. A still frame of Bryce Suttonfield's black Silverado parked on the county road at midnight. Doug Parnell operating an excavator on my land, cutting through the grounding system. I let the timestamp speak for itself. Sixth slide. The 3 encroaching structures, Boland's patio, Lumley's deck, Durbin's hot tub pad, all crossing the property line onto my ranch land, all approved by Tammy's Architectural Review Committee. I closed the laptop, turned to face the room. Tammy was pressed against the wall near the exit door, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a flotation device. Her face was the color of skim milk under the fluorescent lights. You spent 7 years charging 312 families to maintain a fence you don't own, I said. My fence, on my land, built by my grandfather, painted over by your contractor, sabotaged by your husband at midnight. And you have the nerve to stand up here tonight and call me the problem? The room didn't just react. It detonated. Not with violence. With the collective fury of 200 people realizing they'd been played for 7 years by a woman with a clipboard and a gold-button blazer. Tammy moved toward the exit. Deputy Wade Hollister was already standing beside the door, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a folded document. "Mrs. Suttonfield," he said quietly, "I have a warrant." In the back corner, Connie Pratt's cameraman adjusted his angle. The red light held steady. The story was already written. Tammy just hadn't read the ending. Bryce Suttonfield was arrested at their home 40 minutes later. The white Escalade sat alone in the community center parking lot, gleaming under the sodium lights like a monument to 7 years of unchecked entitlement. Tammy Suttonfield was charged with first-degree felony embezzlement, theft of property exceeding $300,000 under the Texas Penal Code. Bryce faced criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and conspiracy charges. Doug Parnell accepted a plea deal within 2 weeks and agreed to testify against both of them. His statement confirmed that Bryce had directed the midnight excavation and that Tammy had personally authorized at least 3 other instances of unauthorized work on my property, including the sage green paint job she'd treated like a territorial claim. Connie Pratt's story aired on KVUE the following Thursday. 12 minutes, long for local news, short for the amount of fraud she covered. The segment included trail camera footage, the financial records, and Phil Osterfeld confirming the fence was legal. 2 Austin newspapers picked it up. A national HOA reform blog called it the most satisfying case of HOA fraud exposure in Texas in the last decade. Every third comment started with, "This happened to me too." The 3 encroaching structures were settled out of court. I didn't demand anyone tear down their patio or rip out their hot tub. The Bolands, Lumleys, and Durbins each signed easement agreements acknowledging the encroachment, compensating me fairly, and requiring disclosure on resale. These were families who'd made honest improvements. They just hadn't known their HOA president was lying about where the property line fell. Creekstone Meadows held a special election the following month. Tammy's 3 loyalist board members resigned within a week. Darla Keenan was elected interim president on a platform that fit on a yard sign. Transparency, audits, no more fines without facts. The new board hired an independent accounting firm and formally rescinded every fine Tammy had ever issued against my ranch, because none of them had ever been valid. The civil settlement came 3 months later. Between the property damage, the unauthorized paint job, the trespass, the sabotage to my grounding system, and the fraudulent fines, my attorney negotiated a figure I won't share here. But it was enough to do something Claire would have loved. I established the Claire Colton Young Ranchers Scholarship, an annual fund for high school students in Hays County who want to pursue agriculture, animal science, or land management. The first year, we awarded 3 scholarships to kids who'd never touched a cow but wanted to learn. Lily helped me design the application form. The Colton brand mark, the C inside a circle, the same one they painted over, is printed on every certificate we hand out. Something else happened that I didn't plan for. The neighbors started coming around. Not to complain, not to file violations, not to hang their laundry, to buy beef. Once the dust settled and people realized the ranch next door wasn't a threat, but a neighbor who'd been there longer than their houses, they started placing orders for grass-fed cuts directly from us. Lily set up a small stand near the ranch gate. Nothing fancy, just a folding table, a cooler packed with ice, and a hand-painted sign that read, Colton Ranch, local beef. On Saturday mornings, there's a line. Some of the same people who used to drape their wet towels on my fence now drive up, roll down their window, and ask what cuts we've got this week. Earl Jessup still comes by every Sunday morning. He sits on the porch in the same chair, drinks coffee from the same chipped mug, and talks about Hays County the way old men talk about a place they helped build. Slowly, with pride, and with the occasional pause to watch a red-tailed hawk circle above the cedar ridge. The electric fence still runs. The warning signs still hang every 50 feet, bright yellow against the brown Texas earth. The Energizer ticks once per second, day and night, a steady pulse that reminds the cattle to stay in, and reminds everyone else to respect a boundary. Nobody hangs laundry on it anymore. Nobody climbs it. Nobody paints it sage green. Tammy's white Escalade was repossessed 2 months after her arrest. The repo crew hooked it up on a Tuesday morning, while half the neighborhood watched from their driveways with coffee mugs and poorly concealed satisfaction. Somebody, and I will never confirm who, had clipped a tiny clothesline to the rearview mirror before the tow truck pulled away. A miniature wire strung between 2 toothpicks with a tiny pair of doll-sized pants hanging from it, swinging gently in the breeze as the truck rolled down the street. I didn't see it happen, but Lily told me about it at dinner that night, and for the first time in a very long time, the Colton kitchen sounded like it used to, full of laughter. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thought it owned your land, your fence, or your sanity, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it now. Because next week, an HOA president tried to seize a veteran's workshop because it lowered property values. She didn't know he'd spent 20 years building things the government classified. You're not going to want to miss that one.
Here's the thing about people like Tammy Sutterfield. They don't actually want power, they want the feeling of power. The clipboard, the letterhead, the ability to make someone suddenly disappear over a paint color. And for 7 years, nobody questioned it. 312 families paid for $180 a year to maintain a fence she didn't own, and not one person asked to see the receipt. That's how big the authority was. It survives its silence. Garrett didn't meet her with anger. He beat her with paperwork, patience, and a grounding rush sunk 8 feet into Texas earth. He documented everything. He hired the right surveyor. He found the right alley in Earl Jessup. And when the moment came, he didn't shout. He opened the laptop and let the numbers speak. If there's a lesson here, it's this. The people who abuse power almost always leave a paper trail. They just count on nobody reading it. If you do with an HOA president who thought the rules only applied to everyone else, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next week video, because trust me, that one hits even harder.